Kill the music. This gathering is unauthorized. Those were the words shrieked by the woman in the sequin visor as she marched into my backyard, her heels sinking into guacamole like it was quicksand. I was right in the middle of blowing out candles on a cake shaped like a toolbox. The mariachi band paused on a confused C-sharp. My aunt leaned over and whispered, "Is she the entertainment?" Nope. She was Sandra Withers, the HOA president who had just crashed my birthday party on land the HOA doesn't even control. My name is Derek Lang. I'm a quiet woodworker, a serial fence stainer, and someone who is absolutely allergic to drama. My ranch house sits on what's called a flag lot in Sycamore Glen, accessed by a private drive that I maintain and pay insurance on myself. The lot configuration is unusual but perfectly legal. My property sits behind two other houses, connected to the street by a long driveway that's entirely mine. It's like a flag on a pole if you look at it from above. Across the cul-de-sac reigns Sandra Withers, HOA president, who genuinely believes clipboards are a weapon system and that laminated bylaws are the equivalent of constitutional law. I keep to myself with my dogs, my vinyl records, and my sawdust. I built my own deck, I stain my own fence every 2 years, and I maintain my own little corner of suburban peace. Once a year I let friends come over, grill some carne asada, and pretend I'm extroverted for about 3 hours. It's my birthday tradition. Nothing wild, nothing crazy. Just good food, decent music, and people I actually like. For the past 5 years, Sandra had watched these gatherings from her window with binoculars. Yes, binoculars. My neighbor confirmed it. But she'd never had the nerve to do anything about it because she knew the truth. My property wasn't part of her kingdom. 2 weeks before my birthday party, Sandra started her campaign. She dropped flyers in my mailbox that said no outdoor celebrations after 5 p.m., no amplified sound including live brass, laughter, and clapping, and my personal favorite, no balloons visible from space. The flyers were printed on HOA letterhead with her signature in gold ink like she was signing the Declaration of Independence. I emailed back a polite sentence with 3 attachments. The recorded easement showing my private drive, my property survey with the lot lines clearly marked, and the HOA map that clearly stops 2 houses before mine. Her reply came within minutes. "We reserve moral jurisdiction," she wrote. Moral jurisdiction. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. The next day, Sandra left a voicemail informing me that outdoor furniture visible from the street created visual pollution and that my welcome mat was 3 inches too wide for community standards. The day after that, she sent a certified letter demanding I submit a guest list for approval at least 72 hours before any gathering. When I didn't respond, she began parking her car at the end of my driveway, blocking access for deliveries. My Amazon driver had to walk an extra 100 feet carrying a table saw. That's when I knew she was escalating. On the day of my party, Sandra had clearly prepared for war. She patrolled the sidewalk with a decibel meter dangling from her neck like a backstage pass and a frown that looked calibrated for solar eclipses. She had a fanny pack full of citation forms, a whistle on a lanyard, and a phone mounted on a selfie stick to document what she kept calling violations. At exactly 6:13 p.m., the moment my mariachi band started their second song, she made her move. She stormed up my driveway like she was leading a cavalry charge. She lifted the chain that clearly marked private access do not enter and paraded in with 2 board members and a ring light like she was raiding a speakeasy during Prohibition. One of the board members looked absolutely mortified. The other one was filming on his phone. Sandra announced in a voice that could shatter glass that I was in violation of Bylaw 9E, which she called against vibes. She pulled out her clipboard and started reading charges like a prosecutor. Unauthorized gathering, she barked. Failure to secure event permits. Creating a public nuisance. Contributing to moral decay in a family-oriented community. My friends stared at her like she'd just materialized from another dimension. My uncle asked if this was performance art. Sandra ignored him and demanded that my guests submit to what she called occupancy headcounting and provide identification for a security database she was apparently maintaining. That's when I stepped forward and politely asked her to leave my property. My voice was calm. I wasn't yelling. I simply stated that she was trespassing and needed to exit immediately. Sandra responded by jabbing the decibel meter at my chest like it was a sword. She declared an emergency session of the HOA board right there in my yard, standing between my grill and my cooler of drinks. She announced she was documenting everything for legal action and that I could expect fines totaling thousands of dollars. Then she pulled out her phone and called the non-emergency police line. I stood there listening as she reported what she described as a rogue block party on HOA premises with possible code violations, noise ordinance breaches, and unpermitted commercial activity. The operator asked for the parcel number. Sandra confidently rattled off mine, adding that she was the HOA president and this was an emergency situation requiring immediate response. The operator said an officer would come by to assess the situation. Here's where things got interesting. The officer on duty pulled up the county GIS system to check the property lines. And because God truly loves paperwork, so did I. I had rented a projector for birthday karaoke, and I quickly pulled up the same parcel map on my laptop and beamed it onto my garage door like the world's pettiest TED talk. The image was crystal clear in the evening light. You could see the bright, unfriendly line clear as day. HOA territory marked in one color, my private flag lot in another. The boundary stopped exactly at the start of my driveway. My property was an island, completely separate from HOA jurisdiction. Sandra tried to argue that the map was outdated or forged, but I had brought receipts. Literally. I had the original deed from when I purchased the house, the title insurance policy, the survey conducted by a licensed surveyor, and the recorded easement that established my driveway as private property with exclusive access rights. I even had a letter from the county confirming that my lot had never been part of the HOA and was grandfathered in before the HOA was even established. My neighbor Hector, who's a retired paralegal, nodded approvingly and muttered that's how you do it under his breath. The responding officer arrived about 10 minutes later in a patrol car with lights off. He took one look at Sandra standing ankle-deep in my 7-layer dip, the glowing garage map, and the crowd of confused party guests, and I could see him trying not to smile. He approached professionally and asked one very calm question. "Ma'am, do you have permission to be here?" Sandra drew herself up to her full height, adjusted her sequin visor, and said with absolute conviction, "I am permission. I represent the homeowners of this community and therefore have authority to enter any property within our boundaries." The officer blinked slowly, then explained the concept of criminal trespass like he was reading a bedtime story to a confused child. "Ma'am," he said gently, "that's not how property law works." I handed over my folder of documentation to the officer. Inside was the easement, my survey, and months of threatening emails from Sandra. She had previously threatened to impound my smoker for creating smoke pollution. She had threatened to confiscate my folding chairs for being eyesores. She had threatened to fine me for having a doormat that wasn't HOA-approved colors. She had even threatened to report me to the IRS for running an unlicensed entertainment venue because I had friends over once a year. Every email was more unhinged than the last, and I had saved every single one. The officer read through them with growing disbelief. He radioed his supervisor. The supervisor radioed code compliance. Code compliance radioed what I can only describe as common sense. Meanwhile, my neighbor Hector, bless his soul, quietly rolled out his amplifier and started playing Happy Birthday at exactly 55 decibels, which is the exact level the city allows until 10 p.m. He had actually measured it beforehand with his own meter just to be safe. The officer measured it with his official meter and gave Hector a thumbs up and a grin. Sandra deflated audibly like a sad balloon losing air. Her face went from red to pale in about 3 seconds. When Sandra tried to continue lecturing from my patio about community standards and the social contract and something about property values, the officer held up his hand. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "I'm going to need you to stop talking now." He issued her a formal criminal trespass warning, explaining that if she set foot on this property again without permission, she would be arrested. He then physically escorted her to the property line, his hand on her elbow as she stumbled in her heels. The 2 board members who had come with her practically sprinted to their cars. Sandra attempted one final flourish at the property line, pointing her manicured finger at my yard and shouting, "I'm citing you for visual clutter." That's when she tripped on my private property sign that I'd installed right at the boundary. The metal sign toppled over like a slow, majestic tree falling in the forest. The Mariachi band strummed a single sympathetic chord. Sandra, now thoroughly speckled with salsa and guacamole, began to cry. Real tears streaming down her face, ruining her mascara. She was muttering about anarchy and unlicensed joy and the collapse of civilized society like she was describing the actual end of the world. The officer turned to me and asked in a very professional tone if I wanted to press charges for criminal trespass and harassment. I thought about it for a solid 10 seconds while Sandra sobbed into her clipboard. Then I chose what I call the softer hammer. I told him I wanted to file for a temporary restraining order that would bar Sandra from entering my property or contacting me outside of official HOA mail sent through certified channels with proper legal documentation. The officer nodded and said he'd include his report and body camera footage with my petition. 3 days later, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. I wasn't there, but my neighbor Hector attended and recorded the whole thing on his phone. The board, absolutely terrified of being dragged into court alongside Sandra and potentially liable for her actions, deliberated for less than 15 minutes. They voted 7-0 to censure and immediately remove Sandra Withers as president, effective immediately. One board member actually said on the record that Sandra had become a liability and an embarrassment to the community. Sandra sat in the front row and screamed that they were all traitors and cowards. Security escorted her out. The city wasn't done with Sandra either. Within a week, she received multiple citations. Misuse of emergency services for the false 911 call. Posting unauthorized signs on private property for those quiet zone placards she had taped to my mailbox the morning of my party. Harassment for her documented pattern of threatening communications. Each citation came with its own fine. The case went before a judge 2 weeks later. I attended with my folder of evidence, my property documents, and a timeline of Sandra's escalating behavior. The judge was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had clearly seen everything. She reviewed the evidence, watched the body camera footage of Sandra ankle-deep in dip claiming to be permission incarnate, and read through the email threats. Then she looked at Sandra over her glasses and delivered the verdict. Sandra was ordered to complete mandatory boundary law training, a course specifically designed for people who don't understand property rights. She was sentenced to 40 hours of community service cleaning up public parks that she actually has no control over, which the judge noted with particular irony. And then came the financial penalty. A fine of $3,000, payable within 30 days. Sandra's face went white. She stood up and tried to argue, saying she was just doing her duty as HOA president. The judge cut her off. "You were removed as president," she said coldly. "You trespassed on private property, harassed a resident for months, and wasted police resources. $3,000. 30 days. Sandra's hands were shaking as she gripped the defendant's table. That fine, by delicious coincidence, was earmarked to fund the neighborhood's new public event permit workshop, led by Code Compliance, teaching residents their actual rights under municipal law. I kept the party going that night. At 9:58 p.m. we raised our glasses in a toast, killed the music at exactly 10 o'clock sharp, and sent guests home through my private drive with goodie bags labeled moral jurisdiction. The moral of the story? HOA authority stops exactly where your property deed begins. If your clipboard can't legally cross the property line, neither can you, especially not in heels and covered in guacamole.